Good morning. Welcome to the third annual Wild Summit. My name is Cindy Carrillo. I chair the Wild Summit, and I choose to lead along with all of you. You know, this is amazing. The Wild Summit has grown over the 3 years with all of these. You know, there's so many people in the audience who have been here before. There are so many of you who are new. Welcome. Welcome back. Welcome if you're new. This is a special day. And our theme today is about choices. Now, I certainly choose to lead. You all have made the choice to be here today, and I can't thank you enough. But we all have a responsibility. This event, the Wild Summit, it's Women Inspiring Leadership Development. We're here to promote leadership for young men and young women. And we need to connect. We need to engage. We need to embrace each other in order to lead. So today is about a program. It's about creating an environment. It's about creating a feeling together that is extraordinarily unique to Wild. So I challenge you all, because there are both students and there are professionals in the audience. And you heard this in the video. The students have so much to offer, and they are so hungry for connections, for that engagement, for the opportunity to learn. And they're here today to connect. The professionals in the audience are looking for the same thing. You have so much to give back. You have so much that you've done. So trust your gut, trust who you are, and together we're going to make the most extraordinary day that any of us has ever had. So where do I go from here? We begin our program with a representative from the Leeds School of Business. This woman who I absolutely adore. Now, the Leeds School of Business is the host organization through the University of Colorado of the Women's Council. The Women's Council is made up of about 125 women professionals who are there to mentor students, who are there to provide internships for students, to be in classrooms, to speak, to be there for business plan competitions, so that, quite frankly, the more women who are engaged and connected and giving back to our younger generation, it becomes so ordinary, so normal, that we don't need to have this conversation about women inspiring leadership development to get more women leaders out there. It will be everywhere. So our first guest tonight, tonight, I'm so done, apparently. Somebody asked me earlier if it felt like giving birth to one of these. I think I've been in labor all week, apparently. So our first guest this morning is our representative from the Leeds School of Business from the University of Colorado. Her name is Sharon Matusik. Some of the students in the room may know Sharon. She's a phenomenal professor. She's also a researcher, but she's a professor of strategy and entrepreneurship. I've known Sharon since I first got engaged with the Leeds School of Business, and she was one of the first founding members of the Women's Council. She is a world-renowned researcher. She's invited everywhere to present her work around the world. She's received countless awards. I would be up here for a really, really long time telling you about all of her list of accomplishments. But rather than do that, I just think you need to meet Sharon and have the opportunity to hear what she has to say about choosing leadership. Welcome, Sharon.
So I don't actually like to be behind a podium, so I'll stand up here. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm very honored to be with you here today and honored to have been a part of the Women's Council since its founding. The women involved, their accomplishments, their insights, their energy are truly inspirational, and it's been a tremendous asset to the Lead School and to our students and to the community more broadly. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today, choices and choosing to lead, is incredibly important because we have so many choices, many more than we did in the past. And so what I thought I'd start my remarks out with is just putting that in context a little bit. This is a picture of my mother. She was born in Chicago in 1928. 1928 is the year that women were given the right to vote in this country, believe it or not. For women that were born in 1928, less than 10% received a bachelor's degree. And it goes without saying that women were pretty much non-existent in our law schools, our business schools, our medical schools. If you look at corporate America, the Fortune 500 was first published in 1955. Anyone want to guess how many women CEOs were on that list? 0. And if you look at board representation, pretty much the same, with a few exceptions. Abbott Lab had a woman on their board in the early 1900s, and Coca-Cola had a woman on their board from the mid-30s to the mid-50s. But other than that, pretty much nothing. So what does that mean on a more personal level? Well, back to the example of my mom. So my mother was valedictorian of her high school. She was an excellent violinist, and she was offered a scholarship for Northwestern University. But her family said, you know, women really don't do that sort of thing. So she joined the convent, became a Catholic nun for 13 years. After 13 years, she decided being a nun wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. So she left the convent, met my dad shortly after that, got married, and started raising a family. And then when my sister and I were back in school full-time, she was a secretary. Fast forward to today, these are my daughters. Some of you in the audience know my daughters. Charlotte, who's 12, and Claire, who's 10. So Charlotte wants to be either a marine biologist, because she loves to swim and she loves to sail, or a lawyer, because she's so good at negotiating with her parents. Claire, who's 10, wants to be either an architect or an entrepreneur. She's got about 5 different business ideas going on right now. And if she was here today, I know she would have been successful at selling you raffle tickets to help support her ski team. But they're coming of age at a time when 57% of the bachelor's degrees awarded in this country are going to women. If you look at the enrollment in our law schools and our medical schools, it's about 50-50 in terms of the ratio of men to women. And in terms of undergraduate business majors in this country, about 50% are women. Phenomenal achievements in a relatively short period of time in terms of getting women into the pipeline. But we still have a lot of room for improvement when you look at going beyond that initial pipeline. We know that there's still a significant gender pay gap. If you look at the amount that women get paid for the same work, there's still a significant difference. And this hasn't really changed much in over a decade. We know that women are still underrepresented. If you look at Fortune 500 companies, less than 5% of the CEOs are women. Similarly, corporate boards across America, about 20% of those board seats of public firms are women. Full professors and academics, we're still very underrepresented in academics if you look at the highest rank in academia. 20% of our Senate seats are held by women. And in terms of business ownership, just a little under 30% are women-owned businesses. You know, and one of the things that I find so amazing about the statistic is that 88% of those women-owned businesses are sole proprietorships. So for some reason, we feel like we have to do it all on our own, which I don't quite understand. But that's in the face of all of the really positive information we know about women in leadership. You might recognize some of these women. On the far end, Indra Nooyi is CEO of PepsiCo. In the middle, Carol Meyerowitz, CEO of TJX, which is the discount retailer that owns brands like TJ Maxx, and Ursula Burns, CEO of Xerox. And there's lots of really great information out there about the positives of women in leadership. There's a McKinsey study that looked at European firms. It found that those European firms with the most women in top leadership positions saw their stock rise 15% more than the other firms they looked at. Here in the US, if you look at Fortune 500 companies, those with the highest representation of women in key leadership roles had 34% greater profits. And for all the business students in the audience, for those same Fortune 500 companies in the top quartile, their ROA, ROS, and ROIC, their return on equity, return on sales, and return on invested capital were also better. And there's also important qualitative differences too. We know that in women-led firms, there tends to be more room for advancement at middle levels for other women. We know that on average, the gender pay gap tends to be smaller. We know that on average, ethical considerations are taken into consideration more frequently. So really amazing things about women in leadership. And this is all great news. But what this means is that word is getting out. So there's more demand for women in leadership, which is terrific news. But what that means also is there's more choices than ever before for us in terms of how, when, and where we're going to lead. And that's really the topic that we're going to be talking about today. And one of the things that's so important to think about in terms of those decisions and making good decisions is having a supportive community around you. And that's really what the Wild Summit represents and what we're doing here today. The Lead School and the Women's Council are really committed to helping be an important part of that supportive community around you. So as you move forward and make your choices about how you want to lead, this is a really important way to get more information. So some of the things you'll see today, there's lots of role models of what different choices can look like. The right choice for one person is not necessarily the right choice for someone else. And so I'd encourage you to seek out others, talk with them about their experiences, because there's a lot of really terrific role models about what different choices can look like in different trade-offs over time. Education and skills obviously are incredibly important as you choose to lead. At the Lead School, we provide this for our students. We'd love to see more of you on campus, but there's many other opportunities in our community to get those education and skills that you need. I don't know if anyone's here from Merge Lane today. Is anyone here from Merge Lane? Merge Lane is an accelerator that's recently been launched to help women-owned businesses. So another great example of things within our community to really help you get that education and skills you need to pursue how you want to lead. And then in terms of supportive networks, mentors, firms, and organizations, you're going to meet a lot of different people today. So I encourage you to reach out and look for others whom you can support in their decisions, and also who may be able to support you as you choose to lead and in your decisions. So we have many, many choices in front of us. These choices can seem very overwhelming at times. But what a great problem to have. What an incredibly great problem to have. And we're so fortunate that so many people have worked so hard in the past to pave the way for those different choices. So it's my hope that today, here at this event and also ongoing, the Women's Council and the Lead School are a really important resource for you as you choose to lead and as you move forward with your career interests. I see Stephanie is here. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn things over to Stephanie. She's going to introduce our keynote speaker. Stephanie Copeland is president of Z-Colo at the Zayo Group. She has about 30 years of experience in the communications industry and has worked for organizations, in addition to Zayo, such as CenturyLink Quest, MFS International, Level 3, and she has incredible leadership experience both domestically and internationally. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm glad I made it. One of the bad choices I made this morning was not arranging to have my kids dropped off to school, which made me rush. That's typical of my organizational skills. So I have just a couple minutes about a few things I wanted to talk about. First of all, what an amazing group of women, and so proud to be here and even be speaking in front of you. They gave me about 30 minutes, but I told them I only needed 3, so I'll keep this short. Also, I was asked to talk a little bit about choices that we make, and I was pondering this because my choices are never clear looking forward. I only get clarity upon reflection, and the thing that became most thematic for me from a choice perspective was something a really good friend of mine told me, one of my closest college friends who we're still close with today, who has an undergrad degree in electrical engineering and Japanese from the University of Illinois. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, woo! Go Illini. She said, you know, Steph, you often just do things nobody else will. So I either draw the short straw or I run into things that everyone else just doesn't want to do. So in the early 90s, I was working for a firm called Cable and Wireless, and I wanted to work abroad again. I have an undergrad degree in German, and I wanted to work abroad. I wanted to be bigger than the small town that I grew up in, and I wanted to be incredibly independent. And there was a job opening in Russia, and I was like, I wonder who else would do that. You know, it's 1993. It was pretty provocative time, both in the U.S. and in Eastern Europe, for change. And I said, I'll do it. And surprisingly, I was one of just a handful of people around the U.S. that wanted to do that. So I also run into places where I have little competition, so I'm not great with rejection. And I went to Russia, and I lived there for a couple of years, and it was an unbelievably rich experience. And thematically, it's those kinds of choices of just showing up and just persevering and being resilient that I think has made for a very rich life. And I'm certainly not the CEO of Xerox, but I feel like I look back and I'm providing my daughter and some of my friends at work and many of my family proud just because of showing up and being resilient. And one more thing I wanted to say about that. This week, I had the opportunity to work with something we call the Zayo Leadership Council, and it is a group of young and emerging leaders at Zayo that we try to invest in development around how to create leadership paths for them. And I think I've been so accustomed to working in a male environment that I become, I don't know if this is male or female, but whatever, become very direct and very kind of, I don't like that, I like that, I don't like that, I like that. And I was giving some feedback to this group of what I would consider really promising emerging leaders. And I found that the females in the group took the feedback so much more personally and internalized that, not trying to create a gross generalization, but it was striking to me, but it resonated because I know how it feels when you're being given feedback and it feels like that's so identifying. Oh my gosh, I did that wrong, therefore I must suck. That's what goes through my head. And afterward, but just not that we should change our feedback, but preparing women, preparing my daughter, preparing my female colleagues, preparing my peers, helping them prepare me for that kind of resilience, that kind of choice, I think is incredibly important. There's a reason that those statistics are so low 100 years later. I mean, women's suffrage was something that we fought for, close to over a century ago. And we are still fighting in many ways to be recognized as equals, but we also have to show up. We also have to be resilient. We also have to be able to understand that if we keep showing up and keep trying, we will be anything we want. And the independence and the richness that we receive from that is an unbelievable trade-off. So with that, there's one other choice I wanted to tell you that I made a few weeks ago when I agreed to stand up between two incredible women and speak was, don't ever put yourself in an audience or a group of women that will make you feel this small. Because I was looking over Barbara Mowry's biography, and oh my God, I don't know how anyone could do this in 4 or 5 careers, much less one. But I hope it's okay if I read this. I honestly could not remember this, but it's incredibly impressive, but I couldn't remember every detail. So I'm going to read through some of it as I introduce Barbara, and I'm so honored. Barbara serves as the CEO and founder of Gore Creek Advisors, a management consulting firm. I know many of you are really familiar with Gore Creek. Her prior experience serving as Senior Vice President of Data Integration Division at Oracle. She joined Oracle as a result of the successful acquisition by Oracle of Silver Creek Systems, which is a leader in product data integration, a highly tech-oriented field. She also served as senior executives for 3 Fortune 500 companies, Oracle, TCI, United Airlines, where she launched the Mileage Plus, or the frequent flyer miles. And what I learned last night when I was talking to Barbara was really with Lufthansa, which was this incredible intersection of complexity for launching a commercial program, integrating that with regulatory change that was going on with Lufthansa in Germany at the time. So I was impressed with that interweaving of minefields that you walked through by doing that. She founded companies and raised significant venture capital, resulting in the successful sale of 3 companies, and has led both business to business as well as B2C consumer-focused companies. Most impressively, Barbara was recently chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Kauffman Foundation, and is also a member of the Executive Committee of the Board of Overseers of the Carlson School at the University of Minnesota, where Barbara is a from which Barbara is a graduate. She's a board member of the National Association of Corporate Directors, where she's a leadership fellow, and a member of the Committee of 200, an invitation-only organization comprised of the world's most successful women, entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders. She served as a judge at the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Awards, and served on public company boards such as National Research Corporation, GAIM, and Real Good Scholar. Barbara has a bachelor's from Miami University and an MBA from the University of Minnesota, and it's my honor to introduce and welcome her to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. The reason why I've done all that is because I'm old. You too can have lots of things. It just takes time. That's all sometimes. So I want to thank Cindy and Stephanie and all of the sponsors. And it is absolutely a delight for me to be here. I was thinking about the story of your mom. So fortunately, I'm not quite the 1928 variety, although a few years later than that. But I certainly can relate to a lot of those experiences. When I got my MBA, there were 8 women in the entire MBA program. So looking out at this, I'm just flabbergasted. I wish we had had opportunities like this when I was going through that. But I am reminded, looking out at this audience, boy, there's a lot of energy, and I'm really excited about that. And I'm reminded of a quote by one of the great feminist people that you would know about, Groucho Marx, who said, he actually has an interesting quote. He said, "Only 1 man in 1,000 is a leader of men. The rest, the other 999, follow women." And I don't think we're quite there yet, but he was a visionary. So I do want to, when you think about this world that we're going into right now, we heard a little bit about all the changes that are going on, but I find it just fascinating to reflect on how the world has changed, and certainly in my lifetime, I've seen unbelievable change. And all of us, I think, when you get to my age, you will look back and notice changes too. But just think about some of the things. According to IBM, and I have to read this because I can't even remember the numbers, every day we create 2.5 quintillion, I don't even know how much that is, it's a lot, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. Every day. That is so much data that 90% of the data in the world alone has just been created in the last 2 years. Just the last 2 years, 90% of the data. And we haven't even gotten into the Internet of Things like we're going to, connecting devices all over the place. We're just getting started with that. So this data explosion, I would argue, is just getting going, and look at what we've already accomplished. But it's not also about technology, and I spent a lot of time in the technology world. It's also about business models, which I find fascinating. When you think about companies like Uber, so Uber is now the largest taxi service in the United States. They don't own one car. Airbnb, the largest hotel company, one of the largest hotel companies in the United States, they own no real estate. Facebook, one of the largest media companies in the world, and they create no content. The world is getting flipped by a lot of things that are going on. I think when you think about 3D printing, we can all be a manufacturing company with 3D printing. We can all be our own media companies with all the social media going on, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. So the opportunities for personalized everything is really remarkable, not even going into personalized medicine that I believe is coming. So we make a lot of choices. So the choices and the context of the choices, as we've already heard from our professor, are just enormous, and I find it very exciting. So today we're going to talk about choices, and I thought what I would, we make big choices, small choices, what we have for breakfast, where we take the dry cleaning, to who you're going to marry, and what kind of career path you think you're going to have. So all of these things we learn from. So when I think about some of the things that I've learned, I'll just give you a few snippets. So for example, in the airline business, I learned that if God had meant man to fly, he would have made it profitable. It is a hell of a business. I love the industry, but very frustrating. I also learned that mechanics define an airplane as millions of spare parts flying in formation. I found that to be very interesting. When I was involved with the Federal Reserve, through my Fed service, I have learned that the reason why God made economists was to make weathermen look good. It's a very difficult profession. And I learned from all of my companies that someday is not a day of the week. And that's one that we should all think about. So I am really impressed by people that had career plans. I never had a career plan, and you can tell because I can't hold a job with all the things that I've done that, how that worked out. But I never had a career plan, but I have enormous respect for people that do. But I learned that I was motivated by a few things. First of all, I have a need to learn. So I have a need to learn new things, which partly explains why I've been in all these different industries. I loved learning new things. I love big ideas. And somehow I've been able to kind of see them when they started appearing. I don't know where that came from, but I've been fortunate being able to be in situations where I've been able to do that. It's really important to me the culture that I work in, which I think is important for many people. And it's really important for me for the kinds of people that I work with. Great people stimulate and make great people even better. And those environments, those four things kind of combined have kind of shaped a lot of the choices that I've made. So I thought what I would do is share some of the things about choices that have shaped me. Maybe you can learn from some of the things I've thought about when making choices. As you think about going through the day, you're going to have lots of opportunities. So when I was in college, as I said, I never had a career plan. So my senior year in college, I decided that my goal in life, I was going to save the criminal justice system in the United States. I was going to get my PhD, and that was going to be my role in life, to save that. So I was enrolled in a PhD program. Had been accepted and was going to start in the fall. And one day my senior year, I woke up and I said, it doesn't feel quite right. I think I'm being motivated more by the process of learning. Remember me, who likes to continually learn. So going to school was going to be a really easy thing to keep doing because I love going to school. I love learning. And maybe the end goal of saving the criminal justice system wasn't exactly, maybe it was the process that I was more interested in than the end goal. I wasn't sure. So I thought, it's kind of a big commitment to not be sure. So I thought, I'll defer my PhD. So I deferred the program and did the next logical thing and became a flight attendant. That's That's a very long story over a glass of wine. But it turns out that that choice was one of the best choices I ever made when it came to learning things that helped lead people, when I got in positions to lead people, and certainly when I became a CEO. And let me explain what I mean by that. So the first thing I learned was no matter what your role is, no matter what job, I don't care if you're the janitor, whatever role you have, you will learn something valuable for that role. And you have to choose to take advantage of the learning that you get from those roles. So what did I learn about being a flight attendant that was so valuable? Well, I learned the value of training. You know, we look at flight attendants, a very different job when I first started many years ago. There were still only women flight attendants when I started doing it, no men yet. But I learned the value of training. So you think about flight attendants serving people and all the stuff that you normally see, but most of the training is actually about safety and about, you know, what happens when bad things happen. Well, I learned the value of training because I had to live it. My flying partners and I actually saved a life of a little baby that had stopped breathing on our flight. And I give complete credit to that, to the training that we have. Because when you're in those situations, you do not have time to get out your manual and start trying to find a page and figure out what to do. It is really important that the training is just intuitive. And I learned the value of training employees, not just in those kinds of dramatic situations, but across all spectrum of employee learning. I learned the value of employee suggestion programs and how they can work and how they can't work. So I am, as a flight attendant, we were asked all the time, you're the front line, you were closest to the customer, tell us what you think we can do better. And I would diligently fill out, I had great ideas, I thought. And I would fill out all kinds of forms and send these in. I never got feedback and nothing ever changed. And what became an opportunity for that company became an enormous source of frustration to the employees, because if you ask and do nothing, what message does that send? So now we all work in, many of us work in very flat organizations where it is really important to get feedback and you can get it really quickly. So I learned the value of that. I learned the value of culture. Think about what an airline is. A lot of the people in the airline business are an absentee workforce. When you're at 36,000 feet in the air flying 550 miles an hour, there's not a management team sitting there waiting for something to happen to tell you what to do. You have to figure it out. And bad things do happen, as you know. So, but a lot of businesses have sort of their version of an absentee workforce. So what kicks in when that workforce is out there? Well, it's culture, it's expectations, it's training, it's all of those things that set the tone for when things happen, how do your employees make great choices? I learned what it was like to be a member of a union. I didn't have a choice. I had to be a member of a union and took what little pittance I was earning as a flight attendant living in New York City and had to give what I thought was a whole bunch of it to a union. And I really, that process was a fascinating thing. And of course I got to travel all over the world, which at a young age was a fantastic experience. I learned a lot about cultural diversity and diversity of thought. And I met a lot of famous people at a young age, which in those days you could actually talk to people on airplanes, especially in the long flights. And you know, politicians, actors, CEOs, all kinds of different people. NetJets didn't exist then, so most of them still flew on airplanes. But I also really learned how people get treated in various roles. So I'll give you a story. There was a lady that was flying first class. You would know this lady. I'm not going to mention her name. You'll understand why in a minute. So she was flying on my flight first class. She sat down, and she had security people traveling with her. So she was sitting in first class near the window. The security person was on the aisle seat with other security people around. So off we go, and I said to her, you know, would you like something to drink? And she said to the security person, would you tell her that I would like a glass of wine? Hi, you know, I'm here. The whole flight was, would you tell her I would like, and it wasn't just me, it was any other flight attendant that she happened to she would not look at me, she would not talk to us directly. I found that to be an amazing experience for somebody in that position, and I have never forgotten that. And I was reminded, and I'm still reminded every time I think about it, about how important it is to treat everybody, I don't care what your role is, with respect when you touch people. I also learned from that experience, and by the way, I had great experiences too with all kinds of other famous people that maybe you would be surprised. Angela Davis, Ronald Reagan, Lee Marvin, the actor, all kinds of people that I really enjoyed meeting. The other thing that I learned was that true stories are better than anything that Hollywood or television can come up with. And I'll give you one story. It has nothing to do with choices, but I love this story. So I thought I'd share it with you. So actually it does. So in those days, in the early days when I was flying, people actually dressed up to go on airplanes, believe it or not. It was a very different experience. And so again, I happened to be working first class. There was a lady on my flight who was, I would say, in her early 80s, elegant, absolutely elegant lady, a beautiful blue suit on, skirt, beautiful pillbox hat that matched her suit. I mean, just dressed to the nines, just a lovely lady, sitting there reading a book. And she got up during the flight to go to the bathroom. And so somebody had spilled something. I had to wait for her to get out of the bathroom to get some towels in there. So she came out. I went in there. Well, I started laughing. I could not stop laughing. My flying partner comes up. She looks in there. She starts laughing. We are both laughing hysterically, trying to hide from the rest of the people in first class. So my lovely little elegant lady in her 80s, this was on a 707, which most of you may not remember. A few may remember them. Round windows and, you know, about 150 people on the plane. She had taped towels over the window in the bathroom. We are 36,000 feet in the air. I had two questions for her that I was dying to ask, which I did not. The first is, who in the world do you think is looking in this window? And secondly, who carries tape in their purse? I mean, she was prepared. So anyway, I should have written a book. It's just anybody in a consumer service kind of role probably has stories like that. But anyway, you learn from every job that you have. Secondly, my observation is observing a lot of successful people. Successful people make a choice to go to something, not away from something. They go to something. They choose to go to something, not away from something. It might be a culture that you want to work in, people that you want to work in, an idea that you want to work for. And frequently it has to do with purpose. You want to be part of something big. And it's a positive energy, not a negative energy, if you will. Why? Because careers are hard. I mean, you spend, as we all know, as much time or more at work as you do with your family, unfortunately, in many cases. And I was reminded when I was thinking about this, I was reminded, you may have heard the story about the stonemasons. So a man came across 3 stonemasons who were working, and he noticed the first stonemason, they were all chipping chunks of granite. And the first one kind of seemed unhappy, and he was looking at his watch. And so the man said, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm chipping the stone, and you know, I can't wait till I can get home at 5 o'clock. It's kind of hard work, and I really am not having much fun. The second stonemason, who was kind of more engaged and chipping the stone and looking at it a little bit more, and the man said, well, what are you doing? And he said, I'm chipping this rock and molding it so that it can fit with other ones so that I can build a wall. And the third one was really engaged, and he would chip the stone and he would kind of look back and observe what was going on, and he'd come back and chip a little more, and the man said, well, what are you doing? And he looked up and he said, I'm building a cathedral. Now they're all doing the same task, but their attitudes and their purpose was very different. The one that was happiest was building a cathedral. So, I think people do work to build cathedrals. in their own way. And it really creates a motivation and an understanding. My own experience, I'll give you an example of how I found this to be something that was really important to me. So as was mentioned, I've raised some venture capital. And for those of you that had never done it, I mean, it is brain damage. It's a very difficult process. It can be very frustrating. For one of the companies that I was raising venture capital, it was right after the tech bubble. So all the VCs had gotten burned in the tech bubble. Lots of businesses going out of business. They'd lost money. Everybody was really skittish in terms of the capital markets. So here I was trying to raise money for this company and in Silicon Valley. So all the VCs had kind of gone up the food chain, and the people that used to do early stage companies were now doing growth stage, and people that did growth stage were looking for more mature companies. The risk profile had changed dramatically, so it was a very difficult time to raise money, and we were kind of in more of the earlier stages. So we made 60 presentations trying to raise venture capital. I failed 59 times. Finally, we found somebody that was excited about what we were doing, excited about us as the team that was doing it, saw the vision that we saw, and gave us the money. And that turned out to be very well. It was the company that actually, you heard Oracle bought it. We got a wonderful outcome for our investors and for our employees. But I failed 59 times over 6 months. It was an incredibly frustrating period. But what kept us going while we were going through that process is we knew this was a big idea. I really believed in this, and so did the other people that were involved in our small band of entrepreneurs at that time. And we finally found somebody, and that cathedral that we were going to build kind of helped us get in there and not give up in the process, and I was really glad that we didn't. You know, to be an entrepreneur, you've heard many different views of definitions of what an entrepreneur is, but one of my friends once said to me, you know, an entrepreneur is a person that is faced with great opportunities that are brilliantly disguised as unsolvable problems. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So I figure when those who say it can't be done, they should get out of the way of those who are doing it, which is what we were doing. So the third thing I learned in the process is you cannot control what happens to you most of the time, but you absolutely can control how you react to it. In fact, you must own how you react to it. It is really important, and that is a choice that you can make. And let me tell you, this is a fairly dramatic example, but let me tell you about my friend Marilyn. So my friend Marilyn, who's now in her 60s, at the time this happened, she was 26. And an incredibly active person. She was a school teacher, a fabulous school teacher, but also incredibly active out of the classroom, avid tennis player, skier, hang gliding, you name it, she did it, and did it well, had lots of friends, just living a wonderful life at 26 years old, very happy. So one day she goes off on vacation with some of her hang gliding friends, and they were going to go hang gliding in a new area, and she was all excited. And so they're this particular place, you would get running with your hang glider and kind of run off a cliff, and off you would go with the currents in that particular location. So her turn came up, and she ran off the cliff, promptly fell down the cliff, landed on her head, and became paralyzed from her chest down for the rest of her life. Had use of her hands, and obviously her mental faculty still existed, but everything else was paralyzed. Only once she had forgotten to clip in correctly. So now she's paralyzed. So as I said, she's in her 60s, so this was many years ago. So in those days, wheelchairs were these giant 60-pound clunky things. The only way you could maneuver was somebody had to push you everywhere you wanted to go. So here went this person who had lived a full life, done everything on her own, was very independent, and now she was completely dependent not only on other people for a lot of functions that she had done before, but she couldn't even go anywhere without somebody pushing her. And as she tells the story, she went into a depression for 2 years. Just completely couldn't imagine what she was going to do with the rest of her life. So one day, some of her hang gliding friends who had obviously were still staying in touch with her said, come on out with us and, you know, watch us hang glide, and we'll go to lunch and we'll have some fun. So she goes out. And she's watching him, and she occurred to her, she said, you know, I don't get this. I'm in this clunky 60-pound wheelchair, I can't do anything, and here are these people flying around in the air. These hang gliders have metal in them, and they're heavy, and they're holding body weight, and why can't I have a wheelchair that I can do something with myself instead of depending on other people? So when her hang gliding friends came back, she said, you know what, and one of them actually made hang gliders, and she said, I want you guys, will you help me think about how to make a wheelchair that I can actually move myself, that isn't this big heavy thing that I'm relying on other people? And they did, and they made one. And she could now wheel it herself, and she was really excited about that. It completely changed a lot of her life. And other people in wheelchairs started seeing her, and they said, well, where did you get that? We want one of those. So she would go to her friends, can you make another one? Long story short, she completely reinvented the wheelchair industry that we now know today. Quickie wheelchairs, you'll see Quickie designs all over the place. She created a program for kids. She was a school teacher, remember? So she would still go into classrooms, and she would see kids in wheelchairs. And at recess, what happened? The kids would go out in recess, and they would sit there in the corner. They couldn't do anything because they were in their wheelchairs. So she created a program called Winners on Wheels, after-school program for kids in wheelchairs, all the things that they could do instead of what they couldn't do, and taught them all kinds of things. I said she was an avid athlete, and just to finish the story, she's just such an amazing person. She she really wanted to continue to play tennis and ski. And there weren't what we think of now as the disabled products, if you will, for people that wanted to ski, certainly. And there are specialized wheelchairs for tennis. So she invented those and became the two-time U.S. Open wheelchair tennis champion in the U.S., two-time silver medalist in the Paralympic ski championships, and a 6-time national disabled champion. So after 2 years of depression and focusing on what she could not do, she had gained a mission and built a cathedral about what she could do, and she changed the world for disabled people. Now, that's a dramatic story, and God help you if any of you have to go through anything that awful. But I can tell you, you know, even in our own lives, something less dramatic, but an own personal story. So I was recruited by a different venture company than the one I had mentioned before. This was also an early stage software company. They had raised a tiny little bit of venture capital and kind of gotten going a little bit, had a product and it had 3 customers, but really were kind of struggling a little bit to take off. So I looked at this company and I did a huge amount of due diligence. I called all 3 of the customers, asked if I could call them, which they said I could. So I talked to all 3 of the customers. I really looked at the market and tried to decide how big of an opportunity. I thought this was a huge idea. So I said, fine, I'll go. So my first week on the job, I discovered, even though I had talked to all 3 customers, we really only had 1 customer that was paying us. The other 2 were sort of, even though I'd called them and I said, I understand you're a customer, well, they were sort of a beta customer, not paying us, and hadn't really decided to take the product yet, so we really had only 1 customer. We were a technology company, and one of the companies supplying a lot of the underlying technology that was the basis for our companies was actually a competitor. They bought the company that supplied our underlying technology. So my major competitor now owned the underlying technology to our company. The management team, I found out, was completely at odds over the strategy, and nobody agreed on anything in terms of what we were doing. And the board said, well, when I came, that, well, we'll run out of cash in 6 months, which is, you know, venture firms, early stage, you know you're going to run out at some point until you get to cash flow break even. So we had to raise money, but instead of 9 months runway, we only had 5 months runway. That was my first week. It was not a good first week, to say the least. So much for my careful due diligence that I had done. So I went home and thought about it a little bit, and not too long though, we didn't have very much time. And I thought I had 3 options. One is I could just go to the board and say, you know what, it's not what we all thought it was. Let's just close it up, take your money, go home and call it a day, and you know, it just didn't work out. That was one option. Another option was keep doing what we're doing and just do it a whole lot better and a whole lot faster. or we could try to think of some other way to get from A to B, if you will. So we basically tried a new approach, and in 2 months we had a new strategy, a new positioning. We fired our only customer, went to 0 revenue. How's that for brilliant strategy? Threw our current software in the garbage that we had spent lots of money developing. Began hiring a new management team, hired new developers because we had a different focus in our technology that we're going to put in place. Developed started developing, we developed a prototype to show everybody what it would look like, and we started raising venture capital. And of course, with all this change, we just knew this would work. You know, very risky strategy. However, it did work. Fast forward 2.5 years later, we had over 600 employees in that company. We were the recognized leader in organizing product and service information for business-to-business e-commerce, which was the big idea, and completely changed the economics of how businesses bought and sold things from each other. We had major patents, partnerships with 2 of the largest software companies, and a significant revenue base. So, I mean, this is the story of a lot of startups. This is not unique. The path from A to B when you're starting a business is frequently, you know, it's certainly not a straight line. Half the time it's backwards and around and over here and all over the place until you figure it out. But we had to make a lot of choices, and we had to make them really, really fast. And you know, when you're an entrepreneur, especially in the tech space, I think, but in many industries, since you're doing things that have never been done before, there's a limit to how much market research you can get, and the limits to information. The ambiguity sometimes can be really overwhelming. But one of the things that got us through this, and that really helped when we were thinking about this, is the end goal of building that cathedral. We knew the idea was a huge idea, and our employee base, even though it was small at the time we got started, was really excited about the opportunity to get to do that, and we thought we had a way to do it. So we were motivated by that cathedral, and it also helps a lot when things get really tough. When you have a big idea, you keep reminding yourself why you're there, and even though it's hard, nobody said it would be easy. So I learned to fail fast and really trust your gut and continue to focus on building those cathedrals. So my 4th point, when you're thinking about choices that you make, is the world is not fair. That may be new news to you. And there's a lot of injustice in the world, and God knows we read in the paper every day about all the injustice and lack of fairness. And certainly those of you that have had children, I know if it's like my daughter, that's not fair. Yep, you're right, it's not, but it is the way that it is. So learn to deal with it. So what I learned is you have to pick your fights when you go through life. If you deal with all this injustice and everything that you think is unfair, you will go crazy in about a week. Not all injustices or unfairness are created equal. So it's really important to learn to pick your fights. And again, back to how you deal with what you're handed, it also goes with picking your fights. So early in my career, this is one of the large companies that I was with, I had been selected to be what was called an assistant to a vice president. And in those days, that was a huge deal in this company. Only a few people were selected for those kinds of roles, and it was positioned as you were on your way to become, if you didn't screw up too badly, you were on your way to become an officer of that company. So these were coveted positions. And I was really excited about being selected for this role. So my first week and I was working for a terrific guy. I knew this guy and I thought he was fabulous. So the whole thing was really very exciting for me. So I got it my first week, and there were 2 key ways that this job was supposed to unfold. One is you were supposed to shadow the executives, so you were going to follow him, and they were all he's. There were no women leaders in those days. So you were going to follow him in everything he did, shadow him. So go to the meetings, travel with him, meet vendors, whatever it was that was part of it, you were going to be involved in all those meetings so you could see the environment, you could see the decisions that had to be made. You could get exposed to bigger things in that organization. So that was a really key part of the job. The other is there was actually some really meaty projects that came along, and depending on the the role you had, what the projects were. So you were also expected to take on some meaty projects that would really stretch your capabilities, and they were testing to see how you did. So I was very excited about that. So the first week on the job, we're sitting down talking about schedules and his schedules and what I'm going to be doing. And so he's going over some things and talking about travel, and he said, you know, but you're not going to be traveling with me. And he kind of went on. And I said, well, wait a minute. What do you mean I'm not going to be traveling with you? And he said, well, we're not going to travel. You can't go on any of the trips I'm on. And I said, well, I'm not aware that my schedule is a problem, so why can't I travel? And he said, you are a young, attractive female who is single, and this is a long time ago, and people will talk. And my wife has already told me she doesn't like it, so you are not traveling with me because people's perceptions will come to the wrong conclusion. Now, he had just taken away, because he traveled a lot, he had just taken away a substantial part of that job for me, the only female. By the way, I was the only female and the first female that had ever gotten chosen for this role. Everybody else was a male, and they were all going to be traveling. So what do you do? Is that a fight you pick? So I went home and I thought about it, and I thought, well, what are my options? My options are, I can find another job in the company. I was doing well in the company. Clearly, they perceived me with high potential, so I could probably find another job. I could argue with him and see if I could convince him to change his mind. I could leave the company and go to a different company. Or I could figure out some way to make this work and work for me. I made the choice to stay for a couple of reasons. First of all, I really respected this guy. And even though I couldn't change how he was raised or how his wife was going to perceive the situation or how he perceived other people were going to perceive the situation, I knew he was a wonderful guy and really cared about teaching me things. And the second thing is I was the first female that had been chosen, and I was really mindful of the fact that if I kind of bail on this thing after a couple of months, what message is that going to send? And what's it going to do to the other women in the organization? And this was a Fortune 500 company, and while there weren't very many women in management roles, there were some. And I didn't want to mess it up for everybody else. So I thought, what can I do to make this work? So what I did is I looked at his goals, I looked at what projects that we had talked about, and I picked a couple of really meaty things that I got excited about doing that I knew would really move the needle for him, help his bonus, and get us going. So I chose to stay and do that. It turns out that of all the people in those roles at the time, I was the only one that made officer. He became a huge advocate for me, and the end of the story turned out very well. But you have to pick your fights, and you have to choose how you're going to fight when you do that. And in those days, it was perfectly legal, by the way. There was nobody to go to, and there was no lawsuit, out there. There was nothing that was happening that was not as part of the rules. So it wasn't like you had a lot of options. So I think, no one said life would be fair, but you can choose how you react to things, and you can choose the amount of risk that you want to take. As was mentioned, I was an executive at United, and I had the pleasure when I was an executive at United to meet Neil Armstrong and spend a little time with him, who's a remarkable human, as we all know. But somebody asked him in one of the meetings I had with him, they said, well, Neil, when you were going to the moon, I mean, before you started this, weren't you nervous? Because he's such a calm, if you've ever met him, he's the calmest guy in the world. And they said, weren't you nervous? And he said, of course I was nervous. Who wouldn't be? There I am sitting there on top of these millions of bits and parts, all of whom have been made by the lowest bidder. So I thought, now here's a guy, who's choosing this incredibly risky thing, but he had confidence, and that was a choice that he made. So you can make your choices. My final point is this. Don't be, and this is particularly in my experience with women, this is one that we really don't do very well. Ask for what you want. If you want something, if you think it's important, ask for it. Don't assume that if you just work hard and people are going to figure out what it is that you want. You need to tell people what you want. You need to make a case, but ask for it. And I'll give you an example in my career of a time that I did it and what happened. And the other thing, by the way, I would just mention is think about what's the worst that can happen when you ask for it. Because that's the other thing, we're all afraid of rejection. So what's the worst that can happen? If the worst that can happen is they say no, they're not going to take your kids, nobody's going to die. I mean, what is the worst that can happen? So we're also afraid to ask. If no is the answer, okay, maybe it's not such a big deal. Maybe it is a big deal. So in my case, this happened to be I was working in a different part of the airline industry. I was not at United anymore, but I had been. And the frequent flyer programs were invented. And American Airlines actually invented the frequent flyer programs. And they had spent a year preparing. They had put systems in place and marketing plans and customer service operations and all kinds of stuff. And they announced this program, and the rest of the industry was completely flat-footed, including United. So, but of course, given that this was a commodity business and a highly competitive business, many of the airlines, about 4 days later, including United, announced their frequent flyer programs. Well, behind the curtain, there was like nothing. It was just an announcement. So there's a whole team of people now madly trying to figure out what in the heck to do with this thing. So, and I wasn't there during that period, but about a month and a half into this, the executives at United figured out that this didn't quite feel like these little 6-month promotions that we always did in the airline industry. This felt like a little different. So I got a call from my former colleagues there saying, you know what, you've seen that these things just got invented. We have a mess here, and we would like you to come back to United and figure out the mess and run this thing into whatever it's going to be. And so I thought about that. And so I really started thinking about it, and I thought a couple of things. First of all, the airline business was a commodity business. And what that meant in those days is Barbara Mowry would fly yesterday, and Barbara Mowry would fly tomorrow. We had no idea. No idea that you flew, that you might fly every single day on the airline. We had no idea. There was no way to track you. Because John Smith, there were 500 of them. How did we know that that John Smith was a different John Smith? So we didn't have customer information, so we had to treat everybody the same. There was no ability to really find out who your best customers were in those days. So what I saw with this program is the value of the data. I got incredibly excited. I couldn't write a line of code if my life depended on it, by the way. I've run 2 software companies, don't know a damn thing about software, except how important it is and how much I value the people that know how to do it. And so I started thinking about that, and I thought, for the first time in this industry, you can transform a transaction business to a relationship business. We're going to know who our best customers are. If we know who our best customers are, we can offer them differentiated services. That's going to change the economics of the business. And we should be able to get more than our God-given market share if we do this well. So and by the way, the second part that I noticed is there are many other industries that have the same problem. The cable companies, newspapers, banks. Banks were classic in those days. You would have a mortgage, you would have a checking account. They had no idea you had that relationship throughout the bank. So I got pretty excited about this. But the other thing that I recognized is we were way behind the power curve. They had spent all kinds of time preparing for this. And they had everything automated. We were asking people to fill out a flight card. Those of you that are my age will remember this. You had to fill out this piece of paper, give it to the agent. The agent would send it off. You'd data enter it. I mean, it was a disaster. So I thought this was a huge idea, but we couldn't do it and ever expect to compete if we went throughout the bureaucracy of United. Because you have to remember, airlines, first and foremost, are all about safety. They really are. I used to buy airplanes, and I would work with Boeing, and 25 years, we would be working on a technology, and 25 years later, it would make it into an airplane. I mean, they really do. We have a wonderful safety record in that industry. So speed is not necessarily their core value on certain things. So here we were behind the power curve, and if we had to go through the bureaucracy anyway. So I went back to United, and I said, you know what? I would love to do this. But here's the deal. I want two things that I think are important, whether it's me or anybody else that does this job. One is you have to create a wholly owned subsidiary. We can't do, I'm not going to be a department. And because I've got to own this whole thing, we have to go fast. We have to be entrepreneurial, and you don't do fast. And we're not going to succeed, in my view, and I don't want to fail. So that's the only way I think this can work. The second thing is, I think this is a huge idea. So if we have a wholly owned subsidiary and we figure out how to do this well, here's all these other industries that I'm not expert in, but I've randomly, done a little bit of research behind it, and they all have these problems. And we could go take our expertise, go into those industries, make a bunch of money, and you can use it to buy airplanes. Now, the probability of this, them saying yes to this, they had never done any, they didn't have any wholly owned subsidiaries. They'd never done anything like this. Here's this wacky lady in California, United's based in Chicago. They knew me. So that's because I thought that was the only way it was going to work. That's why I asked for it. And to my amazement, they said yes. So we created a wholly owned subsidiary, and by the way, fast forward, all these years later, these programs were invented in the 80s. All these years later, the United program is still run as the wholly owned subsidiary that was set up originally when we did it. Now, obviously, it's evolved a lot, and things have changed along the way. They've updated the software, thank God. Ask for it. That's a great example, and it turned out to be very successful. And our subsidiary went, the first year we had disastrous ratings from customers on our program. The second year we got the #1 rating, and it's been that way every year since. So ask for what you want. So as you think about going through today and you think about the choices in your life, career-wise and personally, I would just encourage you to think about these 5 things that I've talked about. Choose to learn from every role you have. I don't care what it is. Big, small, whatever. You'll learn something that will be valuable to you that you can build on. Build cathedrals. Choose to build cathedrals. Make a choice to go to something, not away from something. And I learned a long time ago, just stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. It's just, it's not worth spending time with those people. Choose how you react to things. As one of my friends said, when you're handed lemons, not only make lemonade, go find somebody with vodka and have a party. Just choose how you react to it. Think of my friend Marilyn. You can't get any more dramatic than that. Choose which fights you want to pick, and pick carefully. You only have so much time, and you only have so much energy. Use it wisely. It's one of the few things that you can choose to control, how you react to things. And make a choice to ask for what you want. And as I said, think about the worst that can happen. Generally, it's not that bad. So ask. So remember, to have fun in what you're doing. Failure is not the opposite of success. A lot of people put it in that, you either fail or you don't. That is completely wrong. Failure is a step on the way to success. If you haven't failed, you're not trying hard enough. When I tell my daughter when she was learning how to ski and she would fall down and get very frustrated, I said, great, that's perfect. If you don't fall, you're not trying hard enough. Now at my age, I prefer not to try that hard, not fall, but failure is really important. You learn more, you hear this from everybody, you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. So have fun when you're doing whatever you're doing, and next time when you think about going out on a limb, remember that's where the fruit is out there, so you got to take risks to go get it. And I do love the Wayne Gretzky quote that says, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So go do stuff. Go build cathedrals. I hope this was helpful. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for including me.